The soil just breaks down, aggregates die, the microbes that make aggregates, they die within 28 days of no living roots there. So that without aggregates our soil becomes compacted. The root exudates are feeding those microorganisms, and without the roots the microorganisms die, the aggregates collapse, the soil becomes compacted. And it builds fertility as well. That photosynthesis is the product of photosynthesis. So much, 60% I think, in really healthy soil is going straight into the soil to feed those organisms. And it makes a more resilient soil as well. And well, this weekend's been a really good example of why we want to keep our soil covered with the heavy rain, winter frosts. You know, it's all so damaging for the soil. And working environment, that's what I really love. And that's what we come to, like, the joy of pulling leeks without boots that are caked in mud is just awesome. It's really nice. Well, maybe not, that might be pushing it. And the picture of the radish root on your right, it just shows, if you look at the dark soil around that root, and then our normal coloured soil, the lighter brown soil, you can see that dark soil is that plant building organic matter. And, you know, it's going to be doing that all winter until it's killed off by frost. So, yeah. Winter cover crops are great. And here's an example. Why not weeds? Well, we've got the picture on the right, although it has some weeds in. I never grow a winter cover crop without weeds, so I don't have to worry about lack of weeds for sure. The picture on the left, we never managed to undersow this year, and the one on your right is we undersowed the kale with a cover crop. The kale in that bed, it's not really shown in the picture, but it's so much better and so much healthier, and that's the aggregation around the roots there. Those lovely, lovely, thick, dirty roots are, and all the organisms that are living around that plant and feeding off that plant. And by undersowing our crops, that's what we can have going on all winter while we're harvesting our kale with clean boots. So how do we get winter cover crops into a soil when we've got a market garden and, you know, our crops are still in, we've still got, most of our market garden is still cropping at the moment, and the only way we can do it is to intersow the crops. This is, it is a challenge, and it does sometimes mean that the crops are slower to harvest. And there are compromises to be made, and it's a journey. You know, I've ruined crops with intersowing, but we've had some great crops as well, and it's just learning when to do it, not to sow too early maybe, and how I am very determined to get winter covering all over the market garden now, and it's a mix, it's challenging. But it's really proving the benefits now, 3 years on of managing to have almost every bed in the market garden green over winter. Our main method is to hoe at probably the second hoeing for us, often the third, but it's got to be about your context. It's no good, I mean, I've done it, and in my context, it's no good going in when you're still going to have loads of weeds germinating and the crop's too small, because the crop will stay small. And but you know, depending on your contacts, now clean your weeds, your crop is, and how well it's growing. At some point before that crop covers, we'll broadcast if the weed is small. We just broadcast and hoe. And when we're hoeing, I get everybody to make really small steps. So you're treading that seed in after you've hoed. because a cover crop is just like a crop. Those seeds aren't going to germinate in the air, so they need really good soil contact. I've put off using the Jang because I think it's a bit delicate to go through the weed and the thatch on our soil. But I have been trying it this year and having some good results so I've gone to sowing more of a perennial mix as an undersowing. And now to get more green over winter, as a lot of these perennials are herbaceous and will start to die down, I've been drilling in some grains to have more green and have something for the sheep to graze as well when the crop comes out. And then the easy way of getting a winter cover crop in is when you're cleaving a bed. And that's, if you're cleaving beds usually in August we're probably planting something straight away, but September, if we're cleaving beds, we will, we'll get a cover crop straight down. The week, if possible, that bed is empty, we've got a cover crop coming in. I really don't like doing much cultivations because of heavy rain and the damage that does come September. And by cultivations, that can just be hoeing. So our favourite method really is to mow really low down and sow the cover crop, mow close to the ground, and then cover with a tarp. And then keep an eye on that tarp to see when its plants are germinating. If it's really weedy and we're going to get a load of weed seed in, we'll mow, put the tarp down, and then about a week later or so, lift the tarp up, sow, and then put the tarp back down. And that will kill the cover crop, kill the weeds, hopefully not the cover crop, unless you forget to lift the tarp, of course. And then as long as you get the tarp up in time, if it's hot, I would say leave it until the afternoon, so those young seedlings aren't scorched when they first see the light. And my favourite method is definitely the sheep, but then that's the easiest. I'll probably come on to that later, I think. Species. The more species we have in the ground, the more the different root exudates, the more life they're feeding, the more life they bring into the soil, because all those seeds are absolutely packed with microorganisms. If you want to inoculate your ground, get seed in the ground, because that seed, they're discovering more and more the absolute wonders of seed. And seed has, I think they discovered like a barley seed's got some stupid number, like 1 trillion microbes in it or something. So, everything's good, your compost teas and all that, but seeds are nature's way of inoculating the ground, and seeds have different microbes, so the more diverse, it makes sense that the more diverse your cover crop, the more life you're feeding, the more life you bring into the soil. And you'll have plants that are deep rooted, and that's the goal really, is to get good aggregation deep down in the soil, and if we can do that with a winter cover crop, we can keep cropping every year, and without the soil, well, hopefully by building more and more soil. The species we put in tall crops are different to those we put in short crops. These aren't all winter. Some of these will winter kill, some of these species, but that's fine. If it's diversity early on, even if like coming through in the winter we've just got grains and daikon radish, winter linseed I've just started growing last year. It hasn't been tested yet because it was so mild, but then if you've also had a lot of other stuff a lot of other plants, in the ground over the summer, you've still got that, you've had great diversity. And this year, you'll see in 2024, I've started bringing in more perennials. I'm really interested to see what the ribwort plantain is doing. The problem is with a lot of these cover crops, they've been tested for growing in grains and in maize, and they're all about a lot of plant above ground, which is really not what we want as growers. What we want is quite small plants, photosynthesizing well, but nice little neat plants with really nice long roots that go down below our crops, and so that you're getting less competition, but they're bringing fertility up. And with that in mind, I've been trying a few things. I can't say I recommend them yet, but they're looking quite interesting. The ribwort plantain, lucerne, and chicory. I know that's a real danger. It worked last year, and I think, although they won't get to mature, so, you think a chicory plant is like, in year 2, that's going to be quite a big plant and start to have an impact on your crop. But if you're hoeing it out after the winter, and you've managed to, it's quite small while the crop is growing, and still I've pulled them up, and they've still got, the root now going into winter is going down 60 centimetres or more. So, and the seed's quite cheap as well. And you don't need a lot of it. So I'm quite interested in bringing in perennials, but treating them more as annuals, which has enabled me this year to get the cover crops in, the undersowing winter cover crops earlier in the year. July seemed to be, early July seemed to be favourite. They've not got big. They've competed with the weed, not with the crop. And I've got roots in the ground going into winter. I will talk about daikon radish. I've loved that, but don't sow it too early if you want to undersow. In mid-September, early September, you'll still get quite a big plant by the winter, and it reliably winter kills at -5 for us, and it's gone, leaving a lovely lot of organic matter. And give your winter kill cover crops. If you want to early ground, cover crops, winter cover crops can be a real, issue, is how do we terminate the cover crops. Winter kill species are brilliant. This bed here was sown at the beginning of August, and with these cover crops, this wasn't this year, this was last year before, and we had, by the time it was killed, we had a cover crop up here, which was beautiful. It blocked out what would have been in that field, would just have been Veronica, which covers the ground great, but its root system's about that big. Has great aggregation, but only in the surface. So, and it just didn't like growing amongst that. So that was one of the cleanest beds we've ever had, I think. Well, since deep compost. And so timings of your cover crops are, when you're undersowing crops, are really important. What we've found is, like with cut and come again crops like spinach and chard, usually this year was really challenging with the wet. I'm sure people realise weeds got away from us early, so the ground was quite weedy, so we didn't get cover crops in as well, and ones we did, we had to just hoe out because the weed was too much. So this year was probably early July was when we started to have success with them, but by then we could have had 2 cuts off the chard. But it's fine if what we tend to do is try and clear a bed of the chard, cut the chard for harvest, and then go through and hoe. And now if we hoe in from July, we want to be putting in a cover crop, and it's coming up. It's quite, it's got a lovely cover on it now, but nothing too big that's challenging when we're picking. Am I back? Yeah. Right. Don't switch the mic off. But if you want to get it, if you want an example of how to get it wrong, I didn't upload the photos actually. We undersowed our squash in June. That's another that's a seed growing project I'm doing. So I'm really pushing these squash, and it's, you know, not commercially viable at the moment. So we undersowed a few crops in June, which have ended up with too much competition, and the squash never got away in the cold year anyway, and gave us a because it's homegrown seed. Actually, this year the crop's reasonable, but with any bought-in seed that went in that patch, the crop is absolutely rubbish. The undersown we did on the 16th of July, those squash, which were the picture on the top right, they, you know, we undersowed at that point. By the next week, those squash were covering the ground. The soil had warmed up, conditions were getting better, and the cover crop stayed quite small. The picture on the far right is how the cover crop was after the squash plants had been killed by various mildew and frost. That now is, you know, that is now a lovely tall cover crop. It grew really well once the squash was out. So yeah, don't sow too early. It can cause problems, as much as it'd be lovely to have the ground covered all the time. The secret is, I think, to get the crops growing really fast, so they cover the ground at first. And lettuce, I've thought and failed with lettuce, but I was just sowing too early and too thick. And with some of these perennials, I have found now that if I get it right, before that we've got cover crops in under our lettuce now, and as the lettuce come out, our winter cover crop is already there, which is, you know, which has worked really well. And the same with you can see the spinach now. That was that's going to be beautiful and green all winter, because we've able to we sowed it. We've harvested a couple of times since, and if it gets too tall, the cover crop, they're 3 beds. We can go through with a strimmer, although it's not my favourite job, so I try to avoid it if I can. And then the later the season goes on, so early in the season, we've got the choice of quite a few varieties and species. More species now. I've started to use perennial crops. The later in the season gets, the less number of species you can the less species you can sow. Once we're into mid-October, we're down mostly to vetch and the grains. The winter grains will all germinate up until mid-October pretty well. Some of the flower, I've put a bit more in now. Daikon radish has done quite well for us, because you know, even if we get hard frost, we tend not to get, in our context, I should have said that at the beginning, I'm growing in the Midlands, so south of Birmingham. For winter kill, all the species I had for winter kill cover crops, they're all killed by -5. We've been on the farm for 30 plus years, and we've always had a -5. So I'm pretty sure that, you know, if I put spring oats in, they're going to kill. Daikon radish is going to kill. Then, and daikon radish will be worth sowing now. But it might not get that big. But plants don't have to be massive to be giving you a huge benefit, and I think that's one of the things we need to remember, is they really don't have to be massive to be given a big benefit. A young plant will be puts more root exudates down and speaks to the microbes all around it better than an older plant. It's like, you know, young children have more energy. So, you know, and they're kind of, as beings, they're not that different to us. So not to worry about plants getting really big and everything has to get big. Just getting some diversity in there is a real key to building soil health over winter. Right, termination of the cover crop. That's where all the fun starts, really. And before putting a cover crop in, and one of the major things we need to think about is termination. When do you need that? You know, when will we be needing all those beds? And how are we going to terminate the beds? Winter kill worked fantastic. Actually, because this particular cover crop I did as a trial, and because it was sown in, it was mid-July we sowed this, now before I went on, end of July. It was sown at the very end of July. Having beds free at the end of July is quite difficult. But if you are going to have beds free, it's a really interesting thing to do, and you can then build loads of soil health for either your spring crops, or this crop I grew as this trial to try and plant in winter broad beans, garlic and overwintered onions. We've got very high water table in the winter, so we're really not good at garlic and overwintered onions. Planting into this gave us the best garlic we'd ever grown, the biggest garlic and the most healthy. It was interesting learning how to plant a little garlic set into a cover crop that was up there on me. I tried with the potty puck, which you can't really see that picture, and I'm trying to get a straight line through a cover crop like that didn't work well. But then we remembered, well, why don't we try and roll it? We weren't rolling to terminate the cover crop, we were just rolling so we could get broad bean seed in, garlic seed and onion sets in. And that's only a light roller. It rolled everything down, a bit of it died off, but not that much. And the garlic came up in that cover crop. I mean, you could just see it, and I was thinking, oh no, you've done it now. These aren't going to, I'd only put a couple of beds down, but this isn't going to work. But actually, they did. We had everything killed by mid-December. We got a -5. And the picture on the right is what it looked like. You can't see, but there are some really nice garlics in there, about that big. And that worked fantastic, but I haven't done it again. But well worth trying them, only because our ground's always been full ever since. Other terminations, if you haven't got any much equipment, unless you're strong and you want to put the time in, terminating a cover crop can be really hard. We've also tried a few years ago. We tried with a turf cutter. This was when I didn't want to go back to cultivating the soil, and tarping, when you've got winter grains and that, if you're tarping, it's going to be down for a while. So we hired a turf cutter, mowed really close to the ground, ran the turf. I'm really lucky in that I've got, no, not always lucky actually, but I've got sheep, and just a few sheep, and they are fantastic at taking the weight out of a cover crop if you don't want too much thatch. So I grazed, then I mowed, then we ran the turf cutter over it. Thanks, Alex, that was quite hard work. And then I ran the flail over where we cut with a turf cutter in dry conditions. The conditions were key, and the flail picked up the turf, bashed it against the side of the body of the flail, and everything dropped down separate. The roots were separated from the soil, cover crop died off beautifully, and it looked great. But I had my main worry was the smearing, because really a turf cutter is just like a hoe, but it's going like that really fast. And smearing, it needed to be dry soil. You couldn't do this in the wet. It would smear really bad, and it would probably depend on your situation. But if you've got a small plot and you want to try it, worth a go. But yeah, I think smearing would be the biggest thing to worry about in those, if you ever want to try turf cutting your cover crop. So we still, to be honest, they're still challenging for us. We've been doing this majorly now on all the ground for 3 years, and I'm still scratching my head about the best way to terminate a cover crop. So for the last two springs, we've had side by side, calling them a trial. I'm not very scientific, so calling them a trial might be a bit pushing it, but we've had side by side plots where we've tarped to terminate the cover crop, or we've power harrowed to terminate the cover crop. And with the tarping, we tried tarping without putting any compost down, and the soil was pretty depressing when we took it up. Actually, it had got quite compact. It had lost its the aggregation had gone, and that took some, actually it took a lot of water and a really good couple of flushes of weeds, which got mowed off to bring that back to life. And I'm going to talk more about the problems later. And then there's power harrowing. The challenges we've had, because we don't plough, if you're just like either just tying and power harrowing or just power harrowing, you're going to get a lot of thatch on the surface. Now, thatch is great, and in agriculture, and when they're growing maize and all those crops, all the regenerative farmers, organic farmers will say thatch is brilliant. It's protecting your soil and it's doing a really good job. For us, without the big machinery to cut through that thatch, it's a real challenge. What happens is, okay, we plant by hand, so we can get the plants in, that's not a problem. We are not producing enough thatch to kill all the weeds, and any weeds that are germinating. So we've got to go in with the hose, and it is really hard work hoeing through a lot of thatch. So that's definitely a challenge, and something we need more to think about. It may be a better case of, one idea I have is that you could mow and power harrow, water well, inoculate, and then put a tarp on, and then your thatch would, be eaten up pretty quick. If you could just keep a tarp on it for a week or two, it wouldn't kill the aggregation, and your thatch would start to break down, which is kind of what you want, and you'd get a flush of weed up if the soil was warm. So that may be another thing to experiment with. I'm reducing thatch by grazing before we're mowing, and so although I haven't got the thatch covering the ground, keeping the ground covered, we can get through with the hoe, and that's been more of a challenge, is how much to graze, leave a bit of thatch, but also be able to hoe, because we have built up some interesting hoeing experiences. The beauty of doing this is that we were able to terminate that cover crop and plant within a couple of weeks. I've tried doing it with one harrowing, and we've got quite a lot of grass weeds. There's also grains in the cover crop, and they definitely take more than that to get killed off. What we've had the best results with, and again it's just a trial. Has anybody got the time? Oh, it's all right then. Cool. What we've had the best results with is where we can continuous crop, and continuous crop with an undersown crop. I don't think we could ever bring this onto a lot of all our ground, certainly not salads, but certainly is, you know, there's a lot of experimenting to do here. This patch, I don't know why I've got such a bad picture of the sprouts, but they were better than that, honest. This patch was where I talked about where we tarped, not last spring, the spring before, we tarped before planting our winter brassicas, and when we took the tarp up, the soil was terrible and compact, and we watered and watered to bring it back to life. We planted our winter brassicas. They grow quite well. At first hoeing, I got a cover crop in, all trying to remediate that, you know, the damage that we'd done to the soil. So those brassicas grew last winter with, you know, with a really good cover crop, which mostly got killed in the winter, but it did have some of these perennials in it, chicory and lucerne. And then they were still in the ground, and it was, as you all know, that unless you were abroad, that it was very wet this spring. And we are second river terrace, so, you know, the land can lie really wet. And so I had nowhere to put the broad beans. There was no chance of doing any soil work. So the ground was, a lot of the cover crop under the brassicas had died off, so this winter kill, so that became a winter kill cover crop. And we planted our broad beans under the sprouts. And they germinated. Best germination of broad beans I've ever had. No rooks, no mice, and they came out beautifully. And they grew really well. And with these again at first, so we only hoed these ones, and we sowed a bit more of a perennial mix cover crop into these broad beans. To terminate the sprouts, I grazed them off to terminate them, and then we mowed after that. And I could see the broad beans were just, you know, just under the soil, just about to peek out. So, so that worked perfectly. Then did the same with the broad bean. Well, no, I didn't plant under the broad beans, but when they finished, grazed them off. Then I had this cover crop there, which grew, you know, came up, came back. Then we grazed it and mowed it really tight to the ground, so really knocking back those perennial species. And planted our chicories in it. And the rather fuzzy, wet photo was me harvesting the chicories this week. And they're looking great. We've got chicories that we've planted on beds that were just hoed clean and planted, and we've got they're looking quite diseased actually. But these chicories are, the majority of them look to be doing really well. We've also got green pathways, which kind of become your winter cover crop. They need mowing, definitely need mowing in the chicory. But the reason I decided to plant the chicory here was because these species they'll be starting to die down now. They're herbaceous species. I also think that's something, you know, as growers we can get our heads together, start talking about species, start looking at species, and investigating you know, whether we could be planting winter vegetables into like a cover crop which dies back in the winter. And at the moment this is, hopefully if they start dying back, this is looking good. The radicchio are growing well, and the clovers and chicories will be starting to, I've got loads of glasses, be starting to die back soon. So as the chicories get bigger, they'll have more room and less competition for light. So looking over the termination, there's just not one way for me. If you're not sort of happy to clean plough the field or the whole of your plot, and you're looking for alternative methods, it's each method has pros and cons. The power harrow I really like. I can see that we're going to have to take the times. You know, we'll get a very shallow compaction layer. I think if we do it more than 1 or 2 years, the deep rooting cover crops, they may mitigate some of that, but it definitely needs looking at. The beauty of the power harrow is that the cover crop can be growing for longer, and this, I would say, a month in March of growth and sunlight and root exudates to early April is worth like 2 or 3 months in the winter. And your clovers aren't fixing nitrogen until the soil's, I think it's 10 degrees, 9 degrees, Holly? Something like that. Tolly, do you know? I think it's about 10 degrees. 4. 14, oh right. Oh right. 4 minutes. Right. Okay, I'm not panicking, folks. So your clovers aren't fixing nitrogen until it's around 10 degrees in soil temperatures. So if we can keep our cover crops in the ground that extra month, that's when they're doing some really good stuff and fixing nitrogen. The quick turnaround is just brilliant, and that really works. I've found we have less slug trouble with power harrowing, and the aggregation in the soil is not damaged. Now, I've just power harrowed to a maximum of 5 centimetres, so I am talking really shallow cultivations, and plants are establishing well. We're always planting into the ground that hasn't been cultivated. So we always, we'd be deep planting into that ground. The challenges are, if it's wet, you're not going to go on with a power harrow and have a success story. So, that can be a problem. I'm in quite a dry area in the country, although it's only just south of Birmingham. We're in a really dry spot, so my challenges with water can be very challenging, but they could well be very different to yours. But I've not had a year when I haven't been able to go on, and bearing in mind that the soil, once the soil health builds, that soil it'll absorb loads of water, but you can hoe, you can power harrow without doing any damage much quicker than if you've got damaged bare soil. The other challenge for us is cooch. I mean, I have built up in one area especially quite a challenge with cooch. So whether I'm going to end up doing more cultivations, I'm trying in that area at the moment. I've sown it with a really deep rooting grass. We'll see what happens there. It might become sheep grazing for a while. So you've got to look at what you've got, what manpower you've got to get those cooch roots out. But interestingly, with cooch, I would say I'm looking at it's quite shallow rooting, and if you pull it out underneath that is non-aggregated soil underneath that mat of cooch roots. And I suspect, and cooch is very good at killing off microbes, but if we can get really strong growing deep-rooted plants underneath that cooch mat, can we outcompete it more? I have no answers, I've just got thoughts. We've had more weed germinate since we've been doing some power harrowing, so that's a definite negative, but we've still got plenty of weeds germinating in the tarp land, so. And I have seen the return of rhizoctonia a little bit of rhizoctonia in lettuce again, which we've never had a huge problem with it, but it was interesting that some of these soil diseases have returned, which we didn't have when we were tarping. And the thatch can affect the nutrient lockup early in the year, so you want a more You want plenty of lush material, not just rye. Rye was a real problem for us where we had, after terminating rye, both methods, we had quite a lot of lockup. So you need to feed the plants going into the ground while that breaks down. And the challenges with tarps are the lack of photosynthesis. We've had lack of aggregation after lifting a tarp up, which has taken some time to come back. But the plants, when they're planted in the tarp ground, they get away really well. So it's just mitigating those factors after, I think. And slugs are a real problem for us with tarps and tarping off winter cover crops. Slugs become a big problem. And I think the continuous cropping, I've kind of covered quite a lot of that. And I think that's me done. So I was hoping to leave some time for some, if anybody had any questions. I feel like I raced through that a bit. We've got a question. Go on then. The benefits of cover crops, didn't I? Oh God. Well, I kind of thought you'd all know about the benefits. The benefits of cover crops, well, it's all about the roots. It's all about the plants, the living roots in the ground. They're doing so much. The services those plants are providing for us over winter is, and you know, if we can get them growing with the crops without slowing the crops down, is just, I mean, it's just unbelievable. The more you go into soil health, the more, you know, the more reasons there are to have diversity of plants in our ground, in our soil, as much as possible. They will drain better. The soil's more workable. The soil's more alive. You'll have more macro insects, more micro insects. You'll have more mammals. You'll have more birds. Everything comes from. I mean, the plants end up. Well, they do. They feed everything, and life below ground is just. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how complex it is, and how it needs plants to be that complex. Is that right? Yeah.
Firstly, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I was interested to know what mixes you were using in your gardening, and also what mixes you were using with your perennial mix you were using with kale.
Like plastic. No, too much. Oh no, I have got it. Yeah. Oh, right. Have we got a camera then? Oh, there it is. Okay, so with the winter kill, we use sunflowers, spring oats and black oats, daikon radish, basime clover, fenugreek, millet and phacelia. One thing about phacelia, if you sow it earlier and it's coming up to flower, it will winter kill fine. If it's young, it doesn't winter kill, but it's so easy to mow off anyway, so it's, you know, it's alright. But don't let it go to seed because it produces a lot of seed. And what was the other question, sorry?
The mix you were using with kale.
With the kale, lanceolate plantain, chicory. I've been putting in a bit of lucerne. It's quite tall, but kale is something that we've either got weeds or cover crop, and where we've got weeds and haven't managed the cover crop, we've had to go through with the strimmer and strim back because they were too big to get the hoe in. So if we have to go and strim off a cover crop for it to grow back, that's fine. But that's probably a bit, maybe a bit risky, the lucerne. and the seed isn't so cheap as the clovers, so red and white clover. I'm always putting in some annuals as well. I'll always chuck in a little bit of, you know, a little bit of oats, a little bit of millet. I love millet, it's great, and it mows really well. What else do I put in, Holly? Yeah, flowers, hardy annuals, cornfield annuals, a handful of them. Good for the soil. Oh, I haven't mentioned flax. Oh my God, what has gone on? I love flax, absolutely love it. It's beautiful, it's the most beautiful flower. It's delicate, it doesn't shade out the plants, it's got really small leaves, it grows up nice and tall. You can use it as a cut flower. It's said to punch above its weight microbially, it's really microbially active. I put flax in every cover crop, always, just because I can't stop myself, basically.
Hi. I imagine it's quite complicated to figure out, like when you're figuring out your crops and when out your tarping and everything else, to also figure out what cover crops you're sowing where. So like, do you have like a rule of thumb for like how you plan? Like, is there a simple way that you plan, or is it kind of just find what you have?
I wish. So, yeah, I've got small season crops, cover crops, and the rule of thumb is developing. It's definitely not too early in the plant's life. Every season can be so different, so it's reading the season. So I couldn't stand up here and go, right, put your cover crop in, second hoe in beginning of July, and everything would be rosy, because last year it wouldn't have been. It was still really cold, we were just starting to get dry, and plants, early planted plants just never really recovered, or, you know, all of them didn't recover. So for me, it's reading how the plant's doing and how the soil is doing. But my rule of thumb is come August, or certainly by mid-August, we don't want to be hoeing unless we're sowing. So there's, you know, if the hoe is going in the ground into a crop, we're sowing a cover crop into it. Maybe if it was young planted lettuce and we were going to need to hoe twice, we'd wait until a bit later. But that's my main rule of thumb, I think, is come August, don't hoe without sowing, because come September, oh, it might rain a bit. We might need that ground covered.
And why not earlier than then?
Oh, that's the ideal. The ideal is, you know, from when we start hoeing, I would love to be putting a cover crop in, but I do, you know, I need to pay the wages, so I have got to read the plants, and in the spring, that first hoeing is, you know, you're going to get more weed up as the soil warms up. You get more plants will germinate, more the weeds will germinate different species, and so it's been more challenging when we've tried to do that, which is why I really like this continuous cover crop. It won't go on for too long because the lucerne and the chicory will get too big. So I'm looking for smaller species, but there's a lot to be investigated there, I think, in that way. You were first.
Are you undersowing any of your root crops?
We don't grow an awful lot of root crops. We are mostly we grow carrots, we don't grow potatoes. I should have said what we grow really, shouldn't I? Most vegetables, but not root crops. We don't grow winter root crops because of the challenges with the high water table. Carrots are great for undersowing. If you undersow at that first weeding, you've got a lovely winter cover crop when they come out. We didn't manage to do that this year with the wet conditions. Actually, we didn't manage to do the weeding either. So they had a cover crop of some sort. We've just finished, and as we finished the beds, I've just we finished lifting our carrots 2 weeks ago, and I just put the sheep on and sowed a cover crop into them, which is germinating beautiful now. I didn't talk about the sheep. If you have got access to sheep and you're finishing a crop, sowing, broadcasting your cover crop and then putting the sheep in to terminate a crop is one of the easiest ways to get winter cover. They thread it in beautiful, they terminate the crop beautiful, job done. Just a lady behind you a minute, Lawrence. Hiya.
Interested that you're using a crop in the lettuce. What do you use, and does it not harbour extra slugs?
Does it not harbour pests?
Slugs.
Ah, slugs. So I have tried other cover crops under lettuce, and they've just been too big, and been too challenging. But this year has been really successful, except for where we sowed too thick in this last planting too soon. But at the second hoeing, we've sowed lancelet plantain. There's some chicory in there, but that's only going to be very small now. Lancelet plantain, chicory, and winter flax, and we seem that the lettuce have grown beautifully through that. You could see the stage they were germinating at, so that would have been about 3 weeks to a month after planting. We sowed that, but although they will grow to bigger species, they'll be quite slow growing this time of year. What we're doing with them, with the lettuce now, is using the jang and trying to put some grains in now, which will the lettuce will be out before they're more than that big. Right, Lawrence.
Thank you, James. Brilliant. If any rest of the presentation will harvest,
I'm sure it's going to be. I'm sure it's going to be.
I just want to ask you about this -5 kill. How many days do you actually get that, and when? And if it happens too early, what happens?
Everything dies.
Do you what happens to your bare soil?
Well, if you've got like the picture, if you've got a really thick cover crop, you haven't got bare soil because you've got all that thatch on top, all that dying material on top. And also, those roots will take ages to break down in the soil. And they are still, and because that's a natural process, the beings that are living around those roots, they will senesce naturally as well. So they'll still be there in whatever form it is, spores or whatever, to inoculate the next plants that are planted into the soil or germinating in the spring. So you've still got a huge benefit, even though you've got maybe bare soil for quite a few months. In that case, we didn't have bare soil because we already had plants in the ground, but we didn't have diversity. And as a veg grower, if you've got to get crops in the ground, you've got wages to pay. We can't wait till April, May to do our planting. So if we want early ground, if we want to be able to sow carrots in a warm spell in February, it's really nice to have ground like that you can just get the drill out and go into.
So what percentage of your cover crops actually get killed?
I'm more interested in continuation. So we've actually started putting plants in the ground later because for us every season's different, but with these really wet springs, we just have too many failures if we try and go too early. So most of my cover crops have got grains in, have got plants in that are growing over winter. But there's a good percentage of those crops that get killed when it goes down to -5, -7. And although we've always had a -5, I mean, that might just be 1 or 2 minus. Last year it was 1, but it did kill off some species like the spring oats and the daikon radish that I was thinking, you know, could easily have gone through. And another thing, a lot of the grains, if you sow them early in the year, I mean, you wouldn't sow them in your crop too early because they do become very few anyway. They become too much competition, but they will winter kill as well. So that can be a good way of getting a winter kill, but getting grains in. Yeah, and it was, you asked about the temperatures. That's 1 or 2 days. One -5 will, in my experience, on our soil has killed daikon radish. It can be a rough ballpark for you, I think, rather than a like, right, this happens at this temperature, because everybody's soil's different. But yeah, I think time's up. I mostly from Cotswold seeds. The more I'm doing more of our own seed, but Cotswolds are really good. Some of these species they haven't got on their website, but just phone them up and speak to them. They're great. There are other seed companies, but they're local to me, and you're always going to support your local seed merchant, I think. But one of the reasons I'm really interested in the lancelet plantain is, you know, is I've got pasture with the sheep and all the green pathways and everything. So easy for me to collect that. And a few other species that are creeping in as well. So if you've got species that it's easy to collect, then, you know, it's saving you money if you're on a small scale. Or you just want to add a little bit of something different in there. It doesn't have to be masses to be beneficial. Can you speak up? Sorry.
Sorry. What are the differences have you noticed in like levels of harvest with using cover crops? Are there plants that struggle more with having like an undersowing, or plants that do the best with having undersowing?
Okay. It's really mixed. I mean, some things I think in the end we've cropped more in bad conditions. Early days I was making more mistakes than now, and we definitely had some losses. I would say like that kale, the pictures I showed with the kale, the one with the weeds and the one with the cover crop, we're cropping more where we've got a cover crop. Then there's crops like leeks where I've undersown, where last year I thought we'd pushed them far too far. But as the winter went on, so I just started buying in leeks. We work very well with a local grower who's much bigger than us, and you know they have leeks early, but always run out. And every other year they run out of leeks, and after we've run out, and then I just stopped selling them. But last year, I thought, right, well, I'm not going to pull small leeks. I'm going to leave them and see what happens. And those perennial cover crops, they died back. So come like December, the leeks started growing really well. Farm Direct, they run out of leeks beginning of March, by which time we had, beautiful whopping leeks, which we sold right through till May. So in the end, it was just timing. So crops can be slower and a bit longer. That can be, if you want to get a succession, another crop in the ground, that can be a challenge. But if you get it right, they're often much healthier. So you get less disease. So again, I'm sorry, it is a mixed picture. And if you're going to try this out, maybe don't try it on all your ground. Don't do what I do. I get far too excited and sow it everywhere. But, you know, try it on a bed or two and see how it's working in your context. Okay, I'm sure. What time is it, Holly? Yes. We're over. Right, sorry. Thanks loads.